Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is our first installment of the Healthy Yards webinar series. I think we're just going to jump right into it. It is 7 right now. So I just wanted to let everybody know that we are recording and we'll make sure to circulate the recording afterwards. So everybody that's attending will receive the webinar afterwards. And also please feel free to post in the Q&A section, not the chat. The Q&A is to your far right at the bottom. And I will make sure to address any questions throughout tonight, and then we'll address any outstanding questions at the end as well. So, okay, let's get started. My name is Victoria Mans. I am the Community Engagement Assistant for the Green Infrastructure team here at Reep Green Solutions. Reep Green Solutions is an environmental charity that has been helping people live sustainably for more than 20 years. Our programs help people reduce their environmental impact and adapt to climate change through home energy efficiency, healthy yards, water conservation, and waste reduction. So we believe that by empowering our community to take action today, we can leave our children a community that is more resilient, vibrant, caring, and sustainable. Okay, so we have another webinar coming up that you might be interested in. So we have a how to choose native perennials, shrubs, and trees on April 7th. So if that's something you would be interested in, please feel free to head to reepgreen.ca/events to sign up for that webinar. Really cool webinar if anybody's interested. And tonight's webinar and the others in our Healthy Yards program are sponsored by the City of Kitchener as part of our Rain Smart Neighborhoods program. And through this program, we are working with the residents in target areas to create beautiful and healthy yards that make a big impact on reducing flood risk and improving water quality. So if you'd like to know more information about the Rain Smart Neighborhoods program, you can head to reepgreen.ca/rainsmart. And through the Rain Smart Neighborhoods program, we are working with residents and business owners in priority areas to improve their landscapes in ways that can help reduce runoff and flood risk. Specifically, we are providing free in-person landscape design consultations to property owners in these target watersheds. We can work with you to develop a project for your yard using techniques like rain gardens, permeable paving, naturalized landscaping, and rain barrels. It will help support the city's work to reduce flood risk and help prepare and mitigate climate change. And if you'd like some more information about the consultations and you want to see what sub-watershed you're located in, we have a map as well on the website. Again, reepgreen.ca/rainsmart. So you may also want to check out our backyard tree planting program. This service includes an in-person consultation to help you pick out the right tree in the right place. Full planting service is included at a subsidized cost. You must be a resident of Kitchener, Waterloo, or Guelph to apply, so just keep that in mind. And we'll be contacting people on a first come, first served basis. So if you're interested in planting a tree, make sure to apply soon. And there's the link at the bottom as well. And again, if you need any information for some of these programs, add it to the Q&A. I can send you a direct link if you're unsure, if I'm going a little bit too fast for anybody. And again, the webinar is recorded and will be sent to everybody at the end. And another excellent program we have, one of my favorites, is the Bloom in Box. So we opened up our sales this year. So you can check out the website to place your order. It's an all-in-one garden kit that comes with about 15 native plant plugs and specified for either sun, shade, or wet conditions. So the Bloom in Box pickup this year will be on Saturday, May 28th. Really cool program, so make sure to check that out. And lastly, before I hand it over to Becca tonight, we're going to take a quick poll just to look at everybody's geography, just to see where everybody is at. So I think I'll hand it over to Becca. And thank you to everybody joining tonight as well.
Thanks, Victoria. While everyone's filling out the poll, I'm just going to start sharing my screen and then we'll close the poll and I'll get started. All right, so can you see that, Victoria? Full screen?
Yep, you're good.
All right. I'll wait another couple of seconds on the poll. A lot of people from outside of our area. That's interesting to know. Hopefully some of my plant comments will be relatable. All right, so I'll end the poll here. And is the poll gone, Victoria?
It's still there for me.
Still there.
I think folks can just exit out if they want
Yeah,
to.
okay.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect. Okay, business items complete. Now we can get started. Thanks for joining me, everybody, tonight, for joining us. Thanks for getting things started, Victoria. Welcome to tonight's webinar. I'm really glad you can join us. My name is Becca Robinson. I'm a landscape designer. I am the project lead for green infrastructure programs at Reep Green Solutions. It's really nice to be joined by so many fellow gardeners tonight during this time of the year. I find it a bit dreary right now, unless I'm planning some garden in the future. So I get myself through these like muddy, cold, damp months, thinking of beautiful sunny days ahead. So hopefully you can join me in that tonight and plan something cool for your own yard. A reminder tonight again that the webinar is being recorded, and we'll send you the link to the video of the webinar in a couple of days when we get it edited. So if you're panicking, if things are going too fast, you'll have an opportunity to review all of the things I'm discussing tonight. And one last reminder to please try to keep your questions in the Q&A section rather than the chat. You can add stuff in the chat, but if you want me to answer a question or Victoria, try to keep it in the Q&A so we can keep things organized. So we have a lot to discuss tonight. My hope is that you leave the webinar tonight with a solid understanding of what a rain garden is and what they can do, an idea of whether this is a suitable project for you in your specific setting, and the key considerations when designing and building a rain garden for yourself. So first, we're going to talk about the what and the why of rain gardens. When I look to design or build a landscape project, I first try to think about the natural systems that would exist in the area in which I'm working had the land not been developed. So in this instance, we're specifically thinking about water. And if my house and lawn weren't here, what would the journey of water falling on the land be? So prior to development here in Kitchener, where we are based, a healthy watershed existed where rainwater falls on the land. Much of it's intercepted by trees and plants. Some of it that makes it through the layer of trees and plants soaks into the soil and recharges our groundwater aquifer. Once the soil is saturated, any excess rain flows into streams and tributaries and ultimately the Grand River. So forests, soils, plants, and wetlands exist throughout this watershed to slow rain down, soak it up, and filter it before it reaches our groundwater aquifers or the Grand River. And so this is the inspiration that I want to take for the landscape I'm going to create in my yard. So contrary to this natural system I just described, here you can see a more modern conventional approach that most of us live around. This is what it's like in my neighborhood largely, which strays quite a bit from the watershed I showed previously. So what we've done here in many of our communities is create a development pattern where we remove much of the natural plant community that originally was catching a lot of the rainfall. And now rain falls directly on hard, solid surfaces like roofs, streets, or driveways. And it's channeled directly into storm catch basins and hard pipes. And then ultimately it's delivered through those hard pipes right out into our local waterways, which you can see on the right. So this system is inelastic, it's impervious, and it provides no way for the water and the runoff to slow down, soak into the ground, or be filtered. So all of the benefits that we saw on the last slide that showed forests and vegetation providing water quality and flood control are gone in this case. But by using soil, topography, and plants in strategic ways in our own properties, we can reduce the amount of runoff that enters our local waterways by keeping more of it on our property in ways that won't damage our homes. We can restore more of the natural flood regulation that a healthy watershed provides, and we can assist in the provision of clean water that goes into our aquifers and rivers. And interestingly, this area draws, I think, over around 70% of our drinking water from aquifers, which is the most of any community in Canada. So recharging our aquifers with clean water is really important to our lifestyles here in this area. As many of you already know, in this region of Ontario, we expect the effects of climate change to include an increase in annual precipitation and an increase in intensity of that precipitation. This poster was made a few years ago, and I think trends are already following this pattern that was predicted a few years ago. And if you look at this more closely, you can see those patterns are going to become more dramatic over the next 15, 20 years. So while we're already seeing some of the effects of climate change, it's just the tip of the iceberg for us. So it's time to start preparing and adapting and changing some of the ways we look at our own properties and the rest of our communities. So this increase in precipitation and intensity can cause increased river flooding, as seen here. This will be worsened because we've stripped away many of the important features of a healthy watershed that I showed earlier. All of our runoff goes right into our waterways via pipes because we've removed those natural plant communities and our absorbent landscapes. And similarly, surface flooding is already increasing in city centers and is expected to do more of that in the next few years and beyond that. And that's primarily due to overwhelmed drainage systems and our propensity to pave over the absorbent natural surfaces we need to absorb this water and keep it out of our basements. So here's an image of the Grand River watershed. So all the rain that falls on this map is channeled through various mechanisms, eventually streams and tributaries into the Grand River. If you look closely, you can see the major city centers in kind of a peach color. I can actually use my pointer. Let's try that. All right, and in the green areas are lands managed by the GRCA, which for those of you not from this area is the Grand River Conservation Area. When you're in those parks, let's say Guelph Lake or Laurel Creek, you think, wow, this is huge and beautiful and it's protecting our river. But when you look at it from this perspective, you realize how little of this land is in GRCA management and stewardship, and how much of the land in our watershed is under private property ownership. So one of my professional passions and missions through my work at Reep and the Rain Smart Neighborhoods program is to work with private landowners and homeowners to understand how important their land is and how important it is that we steward it in the correct way so that we can protect the Grand River. The GRCA does amazing work, but there's so much more that can be done if private property owners learn about how to manage the rain on their own property. I read a book recently that if you're interested in some of the things I'm talking about, you may want to read, called Nature's Best Hope by Douglas Tallamy. And the main point of the book discusses why it's important for us to rethink the role of our yards and private property in general as a major source of opportunity and hope in our efforts to combat and adapt to climate change. So this book's more focused on what we can do about biodiversity loss in our own yards, but the principles apply to water issues as well and flood control, because all of those issues are linked to the need for contiguous healthy landscapes. And if we all steward our land a bit differently, we can create those large swaths of healthy landscapes that we need. So now we've discussed the how and why. No, let's see, what is it? What and why. And now we'll discuss more of the details of rain garden design and construction. So here again, you see the status quo system at the top. And what we're going to talk about today is how we can break up that path of water and create opportunities for water to come out of a pipe and soak into our yard and take advantage of the benefits that plants provide in cleaning water. So a rain garden, as seen here, is a shallow sunken garden that's built to capture and absorb stormwater runoff. As you can see in this example, stormwater is coming out of the downspout of the home. Hopefully you can see my little laser pointer here. That water exits the downspout and flows through this little rocky spillway. The rocks help to dispel the speed of the water and allow any sediment from the roof to fall out of that water into the rocks where it's easier to clean out. The water flows into this dish-shaped area here in the center. It pools for a little bit because usually it's raining harder than the soil can absorb. So water gathers in this area temporarily and is eventually absorbed into the soil. While I'm a big advocate of doing ecologically responsible things, I'm also a big advocate of limiting or preventing any property damage. So every rain garden that I design, and that yours should include this too, is an overflow outlet. So this area of rocks here where I'm pointing now is where any excess rain that doesn't soak in or fit into this ponding area would flow away from the home and out of the rain garden through the outlet. And so that's pretty important, so that we're doing the best things we can do for the environment while not increasing any vulnerability to our own structures or homes. When you look at the cross section of a rain garden, you can see some of the other critical components that weren't as evident in that picture. A rain garden has at least 60 centimeters of well-draining soil. So you may already own that in your property, or you may need to amend your soil so that you have a good 60 centimeter layer of well-draining soil. On top of that, you have a 10 centimeter layer of mulch or something that will retain moisture and protect your plants. And then a healthy, thick layer of plants that help to intercept rain, soak it into the ground through its complex root system, stabilize the soil, and then also transpire some of that water back into the atmosphere. So a rain garden that's built correctly and sized correctly and that's functioning properly will fill with rain during a rain event. And often I get a lot of questions about mosquitoes and standing water. If you've done it right, which you will if you watch the rest of this webinar, your rain garden will be empty within a couple of hours, definitely within 24 hours of a rain event. So there wouldn't be any issues with standing water or mosquito larvae, et cetera. So here's an example of a rain garden in a yard where I used to live. This is full. It just stopped raining. We're already back outside playing and the rain garden's full, but within 2 hours, maybe there's no water whatsoever visible in the garden. So tonight I'm going to distill the basics of designing a rain garden in 8 steps. I did this webinar last year and designed a garden for my yard, and I walked people through the steps. At that time, I hadn't built it because it's early in the year. So you guys get the benefit of seeing the built version at the end, because after the webinar, I did in fact build it. So I'll try to sprinkle some of the built photos in along the way as I'm showing you how I went about designing it. So step 1 is assessing your space. It's really important to do a thorough assessment of your property and your house prior to determining if you can build a rain garden, and if you are going to build one, where you should put it. So it's important to go around your house multiple times, preferably multiple times throughout the year, or maybe you've already done this, to take a look at the topography, the drainage patterns, washout patterns, plant health, downspout locations, and other factors similar to that, to understand where you should put a rain garden, where it's strategically, to both ensure that it's going to function properly, but also to see if you can use it as a way to improve your own garden or your enjoyment of your yard. It's important to know a few fundamentals before you decide where you would like to put a rain garden on your property. We recommend that there are at least 10 feet or 3 meters from a building foundation. Again, that's to ensure that you're not making your property, your home, more vulnerable to rain. They need to be on a relatively flat area, so a slope of between 1% and 5%. And that is so that the water slows down and soaks in, and that you're not creating an unstable slope when the soil is really saturated with water, which it will be. You want it to be downslope from a source of runoff. Typically that's from a downspout. So you'd want to look for an area that's at grade or slightly lower of the bottom of your downspout. But you want it to be upslope or slightly uphill from an area where you can direct overflow. And think back to that earlier photo I showed of where the overflow is. You have to have a place to send any excess rain that's not back in the way it came. That's really important, especially as we anticipate increased intensity and frequency of rainfall. We always want to have an emergency overflow outlet, so it's not any excess rain not flowing back out the inlet, which is too close to your house at that point. And you want to make sure that the area you're thinking of doing this is clear of any underground utilities or tree roots. So I'll explain how you find out about your utilities in a minute. Tree roots, a quick way to figure that out. If you project the canopy of a tree onto the ground, gives you a good idea of where the critical root system is for that tree. So if it's a newly planted tree, the critical roots their footprint is not that big. The tree is pretty small still. The canopy is not very big. So that gives you an idea of where not to dig. If it's a huge mature oak tree or something, it's going to have a huge root system. Again, project the size of the canopy down on the ground plane. And that tells you kind of where you shouldn't be installing a rain garden. So for those of you lucky enough to have lots of big, beautiful, mature trees, the downside of that is you can't install a rain garden in as many places as you might wish, because trees provide a huge important function when it comes to stormwater. And so we would never want to encourage you to mess with that. In order to find out about your locates, you can go onto Ontario One Call's website. They have a phone number you can find on that website if you'd rather go that way. And you simply fill out an application form with your address and a brief description about what you're wanting to do. And they pretty quickly, in a few days, will send you a map of all the underground utilities in your property. And sometimes they come out to your property and spray paint them for you so you can see exactly where they are. Now, if you do have utilities coming, like I did in my front yard before I dug my rain garden, it's not the end of the world. You might need to shift your rain garden a little bit out of the way of where that utility is. You may need to make that section of your rain garden shallower. Often they'll tell you where it is and how deep it is. So if you can make your rain garden above that, that's okay. And then most importantly, it's important to hand dig in those areas. So often having a utility in the area isn't a deal breaker. You just need to be a little extra careful and certainly not rent an excavator and start digging. All right, step 2, pick a location. So once you've gathered all of the information we've talked about already tonight, you can pick the general area where you think a rain garden may work. So at my house, I've picked a spot on the front corner of the house. The downspout is there, you can see it. It's sending a lot of runoff to the side of the house, which really just goes right into the neighbor's yard, and that's not advisable. It also sends all the runoff right in our side yard where we walk. So that grassy area actually now has, prior to my project, turned into just a muddy area because we have a lot of foot traffic. And it was unsightly and kind of a tripping hazard. So my plan for this was to turn my downspout 90 degrees, send that runoff, well, raise the elbow of that downspout for starters, because it's a little too low. It's not sending water away from my house fast enough, and send it out to the front yard where I have a lot of opportunity to build a rain garden, but I also want to take advantage of the opportunity to increase the curb appeal of my landscape by adding some beautiful plants that wouldn't thrive without having wet soil. The next important step is to determine the size and layout of your rain garden. So now is a good time to start thinking about your garden in plan view or from above, as I'm showing here. So you could sketch it out on a piece of graph paper by measuring your house and the different features and try to draw a to scale diagram on a piece of graph paper, or you could print out an aerial image from Google Earth or something and start playing around with your plans from here. So again, you can see the downspout coming off into my side yard at the bottom here. Like I said, I'm planning to turn that 90 degrees and send it out to the front. And then I've circled the area where I'd like to, well, I would like to make that look better. I'd like to reduce the amount of lawn I have. And finally, I would like to incorporate a rain garden. I'm going to achieve all of those things with this project. So to start with, you want to plan your rain garden to be about 1/10 the size of the area draining to it. So once you figure out the amount of roof area you have draining out of your downspout, you just simply divide that by 10, and that gives you the size of your rain garden. So this formula assumes that you're going to dig down about 80 centimeters at the most if you have a clay soil. If you have a well-draining soil already, you don't have to dig nearly that much. But it assumes you have about 60 centimeters of well-draining soil in there. And so if, for example, you have a clay yard and you don't want to dig that much, you can make the surface area larger. But if you're using the kind of dimensions I'm going to describe here tonight, you'll use this formula of 1/10 the size of the area draining to your rain garden. And so to walk you through how you can go about that, I'll show you on my house here. I've measured the dimensions of my roof in total. I have 4 downspouts, one on each corner. And so not precisely, but generally the rain falling on my roof is divided into 4 different downspouts. And so I just multiplied the dimensions of my house to get the total area of it, which is 29 meters squared. Actually, sorry, I've blocked the math on my thing. So my total house of my area is 116.5 meters squared, but I divided that by 4 because it's not all coming out of my one downspout to get about 29 square meters of roof draining out of the corner downspout where I want to put my rain garden. And so now I've divided that by 10, and I now know I need a rain garden that's just a little bit less than 3 square meters large to sufficiently capture the water that I expect to come out of that downspout. Now, here's a good time when you do this at your house to get random stuff from the garage, like I've done here, to start to visually understand what that means. So what is 3 square meters? And you get a measuring tape and start laying it out. You can do it as a rectangle at first to get the basic concept of how big 3 square meters is. And then you can get a garden hose and create some curves or something that fits with the aesthetic of your garden that you're looking to do. I've got shovels and hockey sticks here to represent where the inlet and outlet will be. So now's a good time to start using graph paper as well if you haven't already in this process, not during the webinar, but when you're in this process for yourself afterwards, planning a garden. And it's important to start thinking to scale for your diagrams. So I've marked on my diagram here 3 meters away from my house. And I've increased the size of my rain garden because I don't want to dig it quite as deep. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger because I have a lot of space. So I'm making my rain garden about 4 square meters, but I've also added on this curvilinear line here to show I'm actually going to make a really big garden bed, a small part of which will be a rain garden. So I often encourage people to think about the rain garden as just a cell or a pocket within a larger landscape. The whole thing doesn't need to be an island that's out in the middle of the yard with the downspout sticking in it. You can integrate it into a larger landscape bed. So when someone's walking by your house, they don't even have to realize it's a rain garden. It's just part of a larger, beautiful landscape that you've created. And so here is me laying out the actual garden bed with a hose and an extension cord and more random stuff from my garage, and then using my edger to outline the full shape of the landscaped area I want to create. And then the extension cord in there is going to be the area that becomes a rain garden. And so now here you can see this phase of construction. I've removed the sod. I've delineated the full area that's going to be the new bed. And within that, I've started to sculpt the rain garden cell that's in there. So step 4 is determine what you want to do for your inlet. There's lots of different ways to get water from a downspout into a garden. I'm choosing a relatively easy way, which I would describe as overland. And that's also a version you see here on the far right. Water is just simply coming out of the downspout and flowing above ground downhill into your garden. If you can do that, that's great because you know what's happening. You can check on it in a heavy rain. You can check on it in the winter and make sure there's nothing crazy going on with ice and snow. To me, this is the best way to sleep good and know it's all flowing the way you planned. However, many of us, in my case, in other projects for sure, we have other things we want to accomplish in our landscapes, like sitting outside and walking. So these 2 examples on the left show how you can get water from point A to point B while not interfering with the regular functioning of your landscape. This project here on the left, the homeowners have a downspout on this corner post of their porch. And so all of this roof water was just dumping onto their driveway. flowing right down the driveway into the storm sewer. So it was like the kind of status quo stormwater management I showed earlier, where there's no slowing down or soaking up happening. When I first met with these people, their main priority, they were interested in environmental issues and an ecologically friendly landscape, but they really wanted a front sidewalk, which I can definitely understand that. So that was the main priority for the design, create a sidewalk, but we also just created a little notch in the sidewalk and put a grate on top, so that water could flow out of the downspout into the grate and then through a pipe underneath the walkway and into a rain garden that was beyond the walkway. So this way we created what they wanted, but also dealt with the stormwater in a way that was much better than having it flow down the driveway. The example in the middle is similar. This water comes out the bottom of the downspout, goes in through a grate where you're collecting leaves and other debris that's large and could clog the pipe. The water flows underground through under this deck and through a pipe, and then exits into a rain garden beyond it. So when you're thinking about rain gardens, and even more importantly, when you're thinking about building hard surfaces, I highly encourage you to look at where your downspouts are and see if you can incorporate some of these ideas so you can get that water away from your house, off of your hard surfaces where you want to enjoy, and out into your yard where you can do something cool with it. I've seen a lot of examples where people have beautiful patios, but they forgot to think about the downspouts. And so the water just flows on the downspout or on the patio. You kind of miss the opportunity to do something cool with the rainwater in a rain garden, but then you also have water and freezing rain issues on the patio. Here's kind of a more basic concept here. This person just attached a corrugated pipe to the bottom of their downspout and created a trench for it. The white pipe on this is what is attached, or will in the future of this photo be attached to the overflow of the rain barrel. So whether or not they're using a rain barrel throughout the year, there'll be times when the rain barrel is attached to the downspout and overflows into the white pipe. During the winter, this corrugated pipe will be attached to the downspout and water will just flow right through the pipes. And here's the after on the right, where she has backfilled over that trench, created a whole new topography, built a beautiful rain garden, and then planted over that trench. So you have no idea that that stuff's happening underground. And then it has a little walkway down by the base of the porch. So again, preventing like having pipes and things laying all over your pathway. And this is a very similar example as well. This person didn't backfill over their trench with soil and plants. They did with rocks, which could be a good idea if you ever want to check on the pipe or replace it in the long-term future. So that's something to consider here. And then you can see she created a really large landscape bed, a portion of which is a rain garden. And so here's back to my design diagram, where I have now drawn in how I'm going to turn my downspout 90 degrees and send it into my front yard. And I've added a little band of river rock, where I will be placing rocks like I showed in some of the other examples, which really helps slow the water down so it's not going to blast your plants and soil at the end of the downspout. The rocks work to slow it down, and then like asphalt, grit, and things that come off your roof can settle out of the water that way as well prior to coming into your planted area. And then here's the real deal. So I not only turned the downspout 90 degrees, we also installed a rain barrel. This is a great thing to do because then you also have water to water your garden with, and it's right beside your garden, so it's even better. We raised it on a rain barrel stand because that really helps take advantage of gravity to either fill a watering can, or sometimes I'll replace this hose on the bottom of the rain barrel with a soaker hose, so like a foam hose that just seeps out water, and then I just lay it in the garden, go inside and have dinner or something, and then come back and the garden's been watered passively by gravity and rainwater. And so here's a little video that shows the water coming into my rain barrel. At the top there's a PVC pipe attached to the overflow of the rain barrel, which we've fished through our yew shrub there. And then it sends that water into my inlet. And there's a little sneak peek of what my garden looks like after it was built. Whoops. Okay. Step 5 is determining your outlets. So I've pretty much described that sufficiently already, how we need to have an outlet for any excess stormwater. I've never seen any water on my outlet in the garden I designed at my house that I'm showing you bits of here. I have several people I've worked with where we size it properly, like I've described, and they also never see any water coming out of it. One of the gardens I showed earlier, which I knew was too small, and I was okay with that because it didn't have any space, has a functioning outlet, thank heavens, because water came out of that all the time. And so if you know your garden is maybe on the smaller size for what you need, just make sure that outlet's working, and there's no big deal. You just have to ensure that it's flowing away from your house. So often people use river rocks again as outlets. I like to do that just to mark it and to show where it is. So a good visual reminder of where to check when you're doing your kind of maintenance inspection on this. And it relates back to the inlet, but it's not necessary to have rocks. You're not going to have like streams of water washing away the plants and wood chips. So it's just a style preference, really. But what is important is how you create it. So when you're digging a rain garden, you're excavating that basin shape. And as a result, you're creating soil that you have to get rid of. And typically you don't want to pay to get rid of soil because it's expensive to do that. So often you can use that soil around the rims of a rain garden, like you see here, to build up the edges. That helps you create the bowl shape because you're building up the edges. And then the parts where you're not building up the edges, which you can see kind of between the two red berms I've drawn, becomes your outlet. So like at my house, my topography wasn't really naturally occurring with an outlet. So by using the soil I excavated from my rain garden, I built up the edges around my rain garden, thereby forcing the outlet to happen in between the berms that I had built. So if your topography is not perfect already, you have opportunity to tweak it with the soil that you'll be generating when you excavate your rain garden basin. And it's important to have a level and stand back and look and make sure it's all flowing correctly before you start putting plants in the ground and things like that. And so here we are backfilling that rain garden with our sandy compost mix, but we're still maintaining the outlet there as higher than the inlet, but lower than the berms. And then if you are choosing to use river rock like we have here, I highly recommend putting some landscape fabric under it, which will buy you a couple years without having to deal with weeds and things. Eventually, if you have trees above it and dead leaves fall on top of the rocks, they'll decompose and create soil and you'll eventually get weeds, but it's not a huge problem that I face. It's maybe weeding it once a season, but it's not too bad of a problem unless you have a really big tree with a lot of leaf litter or something, and you might want to consider a non-rock option like plants. And so here's my drawing again with the red circle showing where I have put my outlet. When you see the built version, you'll discover that the outlet actually ended up being a little more over here. It's lower than the inlet so that the water definitely flows out the outlet in a heavy rain if it needed to, but this basin is much deeper than the outlet. So this thing fills up with water before anything would ever come out of the outlet. And there's a picture of it once it was built. Like I said, it's a little closer to the inlet than I originally planned. I think it just looked better, but the basin is much deeper than both the inlet and the outlet. So there's no issue with water flowing out. All right, step 6 is planning your soil amendments. So as I've mentioned, it's important to have 60 centimeters of well-draining soil. On top of that, you have 10 centimeters of wood chips and about 15 centimeters of ponding. So that's just open space where water ponds before it has a chance to soak in. So if you add all that up, that's 85 centimeters. That's a lot of digging. So it's important to find out what type of soil you have naturally in your yard. If you already have well-draining soil, lucky you, you don't have to dig a full 85 centimeter pit to build a rain garden. If you have clay that does not drain well, you do have to remove around 85 centimeters of that soil, put it somewhere creative in your yard or a bin potentially, and amend that full depth of soil with stuff that you purchase, which would be sand and compost, as I've mentioned. So in order to figure all this stuff out and to find out how much soil you need to purchase to amend your soil, it's important to find out what kind of soil you have in your yard and how well does it drain. And there's lots of resources online if you Google soil test or ribbon test to find out different tricks you can do to determine if your soil is sand, loam, or clay. In order to find out how well your soil drains, you can do an infiltration test. And you can see a bit of an image here where someone's doing that. For that, you simply dig a hole, fill it with water, allow it to soak away. Once the soil is saturated, you fill it with water again, and you measure how much it goes down in an hour. And from that, you get a rate, an infiltration rate. And then you have to look up or look at our website to find out what infiltration rates qualify as well draining versus poorly draining. If you have well draining soil, great. Then this is a great spot for a rain garden. If you have poorly draining or clay soils, you can definitely still build a rain garden, but you have to take more care in amending that soil to make sure you're not just creating a pond. So based on the outcome of your soil test and your infiltration test, you'll need to buy ingredients to create a soil mix that winds up being approximately 60% sand and 40% compost. If you do have clay, that makes the math easy because you're replacing 100% of the soil. So you just need to do some math to figure out how much sand to buy and how much compost to buy. My yard turned out to be basically like beach sand underground. And so I dug my rain garden pit and I just mixed in with a hand shovel here, compost that I purchased from the garden center. So you can see how it's pretty sandy. And then I'm just folding in compost, eyeballing it to get about a 60% sand, 40% compost mix. The sand is what keeps the soil soaking up water really efficiently, and the compost is what provides the nutrients needed for those plants to grow. So it's important that you have both. A sandy rain garden will work really well, it just won't have any plants in it, or a full sand. So it depends on what aesthetic you're looking for, but if you'd like to have plants in it like mine, compost is important to get those plants healthy and growing in your first season. So now the fun part that I think is the most fun is planting design. So rain garden plants are unique. They can tolerate full inundation during a rain. So they can be in standing water for several hours, but they can also tolerate periods of drought because they are in fact sitting in a bunch of sand. So in between rain events, that soil can get really dry and drought-like conditions. During a rain, they're underwater. So it's a unique suite of plants that you can put in a rain garden. And it's important to do your research to make sure you're getting ones that do qualify for that. So you're not disappointed after a rain or two. So there's three main conditions to think of on kind of your first tier of brainstorming for your planting design. Your soil conditions, the light conditions, and the mature size of the plant. You need to understand what type of soil you have, so you're choosing plants that can tolerate that. We know what kind of soil we have in a rain garden because we bought it and put it there. So it's sandy compost mix. And the plants I'm going to talk about in a minute are all conditions for that type of soil. Light conditions are going to vary across all of the rain gardens that you guys are going to design from here. Some of you will have shade, part sun, full sun. So it's important to understand what conditions are in your yard. And in order to do that, you just need to monitor how many hours of sunlight the area you're going to put your garden in gets. Full sun is over 6 hours of intense sun, full sun. Part sun, I think, is 3 to 6 hours of intense sun, and shade is 3 or less hours of direct sun. And then another really important factor is mature size. And lots of people get burned by this. These little baby plants here I show are what native plant plugs look like when you get them in the mail or purchase them from the blooming box, like Victoria mentioned. And they're really sweet and cute, and they get in the ground. It's like a little disappointing because they're just little, but like 1 season, 2 seasons, these will be really big. They're going to spread and be up to your knee or more. So it's important to know that about them and space them accordingly, or you're going to be fighting an overgrown garden by year 2 of this project, which isn't what you want. So if you live in our area, which I think many of us do, but quite a few of us don't, we've taken the guesswork out of it for you at Reep. Then you can go to our website, reepgreen.ca/healthy-yards, to see our rain garden plant list. And so we have dozens of beautiful perennials, shrubs, and grasses that do survive in rain garden conditions. On our plant list, we show how tall they get, so that can help you plan what you want to put where, so you're not putting something that gets really tall in front of something that stays small, because you can't really tell the difference when you get them as babies. We tell you if this plant can tolerate being on the side of a rain garden, which you see with the S, or in the base of a rain garden. So the plants with B can really stand some heavy water infiltration. The S plants can tolerate rain garden conditions sometimes, but they're not going to be happy at the bottom of rain garden, which stays wet the longest. And then we show you the sun conditions or light tolerance of each plant. So there's fewer that are tolerant of shade than sun, but there's quite a few that can do shade and lots that can do full sun. For areas around your rain garden, like I showed in my version of my project, there's a bit of a rain garden, but then there's a big bed around it. You don't have to have rain garden plants for those sections. So Canadian Wildlife Federation's Native Plant Encyclopedia is a good place to get ideas for what plants you might want to put in the areas around your rain garden that don't need to tolerate that inundation. And there's quite a few shrubs that will work in a rain garden as well. So I'm going to kind of blast through this because I'm realizing it's running a little late. So in my project here, I have put in my garden path to make sure I don't plant where I want to do that. And I've added 3 red twig dogwoods. Now they love rain gardens. They love moist soil. They soak up a lot of moisture, which is great, but they are huge. So many of our residential landscapes can't tolerate red twig dogwoods. They'll like take over your yard. So something to check out is a nativar, which is kind of a slang, I guess, for it's native, but bred with a landscape horticultural variety that doesn't get so big. So I got 3 dwarf red twig dogwoods. They're functioning beautifully in my rain garden. They look really nice. The red twigs in the winter looks awesome with the conifers behind them, but they're not 6 to 10 feet tall like the pure native version. So something to keep in mind. I love native plants, but I'm not a complete purist because I want to have stuff that works well in my yard. So the next kind of layer of things to think about with planting design is seasonal interest, texture, bloom color, and leaf color. Here's an example of a yellow twig dogwood with conifers behind it. This is one of my favorite kind of combinations, as I just mentioned, because you can get cool winter interest with deciduous plants if they have neat stems like this plant. 9 bark is another good one. Texture is just the art of mixing coarse texture, broad leaves with little fine texture, small leaves. And I like to look into nature to give me inspiration for how to design gardens. And these are just 2 pictures I took on a hike last spring. We have someone's from North Carolina I saw in the chat, and these are from North Carolina, a hike I took in the western part of North Carolina, but these plants exist here too. On the left, you see wood aster mixed with mayapple. And this is a good example of how you mix a big fat broadleaf from the mayapple with fine texture of an aster. And because they're beside each other, you can kind of appreciate each individually. Similarly, you have trillium here in the middle with a broadleaf next to some ferns and some other plants I don't know that have a fine texture. Now, if you picture a garden that had trillium and mayapple beside each other, you might not appreciate each individually because it's just one block of similar texture. If you had a bunch of wood aster mixed in with a bunch of fine textured ferns, you might not notice the difference between those either. It's when you mix and alternate the texture that you really create a beautiful garden that's pleasing on the eye and that enables you to appreciate the different plants you have in it. Nature's beautiful combination of aster and goldenrod over here on the left in the fall is also inspiring to me. I always like to remind people how important fall blooming plants are. We like to feed monarchs, it seems, as a culture, early in the spring and in the summer when they're hatching and becoming caterpillars. but they're migrating in the fall. And so it's important that we incorporate blooming plants in the fall so that our migrators have some nourishment along the way. So it's great to plant milkweed and things for the earlier stages, but don't forget about those poor butterflies traveling to Mexico. And it's nice to give them a little nourishment along the way with fall blooming plants. And then this garden on the right is another good example of mixing coarse texture of hostas with fine texture of ostrich fern. Within the rain garden, there's fine texture of fox sedge mixed with coarse texture of dogwood again. And then also coordinating bloom color. So there's like lilac blooms mixed with allium bulbs, and then coordinated within the rain garden, blue flag iris. It's not in bloom in this photo, but it's there. So kind of, I like to keep a little chart of what colors are happening during different times of the year by month. So to make sure that what you've got blooming will go nicely together. And then my last kind of example, I think, for planting design here is a garden, it's also in North Carolina, incidentally, that mixes daylilies, a non-native, kind of more traditional landscape plant, with butterfly weed and little blue stem. And I like to put this in here because I want to remind people that you want to create a garden that you love. And many of the things we love are because it's sentimental or has some special place in our history. And so, like I say, native plants are wonderful and really important. But if there's a plant you love for other reasons, let's say it's a hydrangea or something, or a rose, it's okay to put those in your garden. And there's lots of artful ways you can mix them in with natives so that you're still packing that ecological punch, but also making a space that makes you happy. So for my garden here, I've got the foundation planting sorted with my red twig dogwood that I show in the big red circles, and then my foundation planting of the conifers. And so I'm going to really have fun with the blooms in my rain garden. And I've got liatris, blazing star, Joe Pye weed here at the top, and blue flag iris are my main kind of show-stopping bloomers for my garden. And around the garden, so on the rim of the rain garden, I'm going to incorporate little blue stem, butterfly weed, fern, I forget the species, and some aster and bee balm. And I'm going to mix some lady's mantle because I just love the way it looks with rain or dew on it. And that's a non-native. And again, it's to throw it in there just because I really like it. And its coarse texture will offset the fine texture of some of these natives. And so here's my garden the day I finished it. So the plants are little, but you can see all the main ingredients of a rain garden: downspout or rain barrel overflow, inlet, rain garden basin with a lot of little baby plants, my outlet here, and then lots of other beautiful plants that will grow and mature around it on the edges in a little garden path. And I show it from this perspective too, because I want to emphasize the point that your rain garden, a well-designed rain garden, should integrate into a larger landscape. So once you plan the details of your rain garden, make sure to zoom out and think about what else is in your yard and where you're going to put other things. And then my final reminder that these plants get big. So this is just one of those little baby plants I showed earlier, just later that year, I think in September, and I planted this in May. So they do get big and you do need to plan for it. The last thing I'll end with tonight is just to remind you to keep in mind maintenance. It's nice to think about maintenance when you're designing it. So you're designing something that you can maintain. Every year, maybe twice a year in the fall and the spring, you want to make sure that your inlet and outlet are clear of sediment, fallen leaves, sticks, random debris from the winter, just to make sure that water is flowing into and through your rain garden efficiently. During the first year or two years of a rain garden, you need to water those plants. So they are drought tolerant, but not until they become established and more mature. So you do need to plan on watering your rain garden during the summer for at least 2 summers. And every year for the foreseeable future, you want to just make sure that you've got that thick layer of wood chips, shredded mulch. That will help suppress weeds. It will help retain moisture for your plants. And provide ongoing nutrients for those plants. So with that, I will say thank you so much for coming. I hope you learned some things. I hope you are inspired to design a rain garden for yourself And Victoria can read some of the questions if you don't mind.
Yeah, we have a lot of great ones here. So I think we'll choose this one. So Jordana says, any tips on how to add more sand to an existing water garden? I'm assuming they mean rain garden that is too wet all of the time. How can I fix it without digging it all up?
Too wet all of the time. It sounds like maybe rather than digging in the garden, you should lower the inlet so that water can escape from the garden sooner. So I guess the question would be, is there an outlet so that when that garden is full, water can exit? And if there isn't, maybe you could take some of the things we learned tonight to incorporate an outlet, dig a little notch in the garden so that when it does get full, water can exit it into your lawn. If you already have an outlet, maybe it's not at the right height. If it's not working well, you maybe need to dig it down deeper and fill it with landscape fabric and rocks or something that would really welcome water to flow back out of that basin and help the soils not be so saturated. If you don't want to dig in the garden, it's probably too late to amend the soil anymore. Like adding sand on top won't be effective. So the third suggestion I would have is to potentially start slowly replacing plants that aren't thriving with ones that can tolerate more wet conditions, perhaps.
Awesome. Okay. So next question is by Mary. If you can't avoid tree roots on the property, is there another way to facilitate draining, such as a dry creek bed and something that is shallow but will catch some water?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, is the answer. So your tree is awesome for drainage. Most likely, most trees are, depending on the species, I guess. But yeah, so I've seen some people who dig like an infiltration gallery, or a dry creek bed is a good word for it. You just would want to hand dig that so that you're not chopping out critical bits of root. If you're really ginger, you could dig generally what you want without damaging the roots. You'd have to be delicate with placing landscape fabric and backfilling that area with gravel and things that will hold water, but also ensure that it's sloping away so it's not just creating a trench where water is sitting. So the technical words to learn more about that, if you were to Google, would be like an infiltration gallery, or dry creek bed would work. That's the same thing as the infiltration gallery that's up at grade. But that is a good idea and can be done carefully without damaging trees.
Awesome. Okay. Okay, so another great question by Jordana. What do you suggest for those with a natural creek? Can you plant a rain garden around a flowing creek?
Okay. Let's see, you could, I guess the question I have is, where is your source of water? Are you meaning you divert water from the creek into a rain garden, or catch water from your house or driveway prior to entering the creek? If it's the latter, that would be a great service to the creek. If you're creating more absorbent, healthy landscapes for water to enter from a hard surface uphill before it would ultimately enter the creek, that would be a great idea. If the water you're intending it to come from the creek, then I would maybe not consider that a rain garden. I wouldn't worry about amending the soils, but I would just expand the riparian zone around that creek. Do some research about what plants like to live in the riparian zone in your area. If it's Kitchener, then I could help you more. But and just garden along the banks of that creek with riparian plants, and that would be probably very beautiful and rewarding.
Nice. Okay. A question from Matt and Nat. Can a water garden or a rain garden be made where a sump pump spout, which is 10 feet from the house, comes out?
Definitely. That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, because often sump pumps are like spitting water out of a basement or a foundation area and back into the source area, where it's just going back towards the house. So a rain garden is in manipulating the topography of the rain garden so that water is coming out of your sump pump pipe 10 feet from your house and then staying in your rain garden, going down into the soil rather than coming out of the pipe on the surface of the lawn and flowing back towards your house. That's a great idea. And that's widely recommended by the municipalities around here to incorporate these types of features at the base of sump pump pipe if it meets all the criteria that we've talked about tonight.
Perfect. Okay, so another great question by Stephanie. Should rain gardens be kept a certain distance away from concrete paths or stone pathways? Not sure if they might cause the ground to heave.
I usually would, like, I guess I would keep them like a foot away from a concrete surface, just so that when you're digging it down, you're not undermining the base layers of the concrete surface. So I don't think there'd be an issue with heaving. But if you remember, the rain garden is like, it's quite shallow and then it gets deeper as you go in. So I would start the shallow part a foot or two from your concrete. By the time you're actually getting deep, you're quite a ways from your concrete at that point, and you're keeping that water in that deep spot away from the concrete. So you might even be doing it a favor by making sure that water stays away from the concrete into the deepest part of your rain garden. So yeah, if you're planting, like, don't dig a rectangular prism into the ground with straight walls. You want to make sure it's like feathered, so that the deepest part is several feet from the sidewalk or driveway.
Yeah, great questions tonight. Okay. So Julie says, I'm told we have a French drain in our yard. Is that effective for helping groundwater, or should we replace it with a rain garden?
That's a tricky question because people refer to French drains for a lot of different things. So like, I can't be sure what that means in your case. And sometimes you might not be sure because you don't, like, if it was installed before you moved in, you wouldn't know. I have that situation in my house. I have a downspout that like goes into the ground, but I don't really know what's going on beyond that. French drains can accomplish a lot of positive benefits for reducing runoff if the pipe that's underground is perforated and surrounded in a cavity of gravel, so that water is exiting the pipe and percolating into the ground. If it's just a pipe that's sending water off to some other point, like, you would need to find out where the end of that pipe is and what's going on at the base of it. If, for example, it's gathering water and you see the end of it at the edge of your yard dumping any water on the sidewalk, that's not best practice, and that would be an opportunity to dig up that pipe, cut it off earlier, and allow that water to be soaked up into a rain garden on your property prior to it reaching the sidewalk or the street or whatever.
Okay, awesome. Okay, Mitchell, I think, or Michelle, can you plant a rain garden on a slope at all?
The ideal setting is at 1 to 5% slope. So that's pretty flat. Otherwise you would need a pipe or an under drain or something at the bottom, so that water is basically just like flowing through the rain garden and not sitting in the rain garden. So if you have a steep area, you can do some infiltration projects. I wouldn't call it a rain garden because you wouldn't want to dig up and replace soil on a slope with sand. It's not stable enough probably. But you could create like a stormwater management garden. That's not a very exciting name. You could choose plants to go in that area so that water is absorbed in there or intercepted from above, and consider putting an under drain at the bottom if you were building this from scratch, so that water flows through that and then is sent away from this slope. So I guess the short answer to that is I wouldn't advise doing the types of things I showed tonight on a steeper slope than about 5%. And if you can Google kind of how to calculate a slope if you want to figure out what that 5% is. It's pretty flat.
Awesome. And I think they can figure that out through the rain garden workbook, right? That we send out?
Yes, yes, for some people in the local area would have access to that. Otherwise, if you just Googled like how do I determine my slope, you can find out how to do that with string and level.
Okay. And I think we'll do one last question. So Aileen says, what can you do if a larger area of your lawn receives seasonal inundation from spring melt?
That's a really good question. Maybe something I should have said earlier. So when you have drainage issues in your yard, a rain garden can be a positive solution or a tool in your tool belt. The picture I'm showing here is a rain garden I built in a yard that was mine before my other one I showed. If you still see my marker, this whole area of our yard was like constantly inundated, major puddles right in front of the shed. It was a big mess. The grass was torn up because it was so muddy. So the key here is to not put your rain garden in your problem area. We wouldn't want to put a rain garden here because we walk there, but also that is too late to solve your problem with a rain garden. So the key is to build your rain garden before that so that less water gets down to that problem area. So if you can use a rain garden more closer to your downspout or your source of water, whatever that is, capture all that, as much water as you can in your rain garden, then less of it winds up into your problem area. So again, the key there is to figure out where your problem area is and then look slightly uphill from there to figure out where you could solve that problem.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, we had quite a few questions like that. So that I think that'll help a lot of people. Okay. Did you want to answer one more, Becca, or?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, one more? Okay. Okay. So here's a good one that I knew you would probably know. If you're digging a rain garden on a boulevard, would a curb cut be the inlet and outlet?
Great question. So first, I would say make sure it's okay with your municipality to do curb cuts. Some of them do them, like that's often how municipalities design boulevards in some progressive areas, including Kitchener in the pretty soon future. So a curb cut it would be two separate curb cuts. For those of you who are not familiar, it would be a garden that's in that area of landscape between the municipal sidewalk and the street. Boulevard is what it's called in Canada. I never called it that in the United States. It's also known as the hell strip because it's a really tough place for plants to live. But if you cut you would cut a notch in the curb at the high end. So assume the street's like at an angle because most streets aren't perfectly flat. You would cut the curb on the high side, would do the inlet, so water would flow into your boulevard rain garden, and then you'd have another curb cut at the bottom. So it's exiting would be one way. A second way is to install a drain, which would be like a dome shaped grate in the rain garden. So water would come in the curb cut as an inlet. Then the water would rise in your garden. And when it reaches capacity, it would flow into this kind of dome shaped outlet. And then that would be connected to a pipe that carries the water away. Like municipalities do it that way. Most residential situations, you're not in control of those areas to the degree where to be able to do this type of thing. So in the event that you are, those would be the two ways I would recommend it. Interesting question.
Yeah, good question. Okay, that was everything.
Cool. All right. Well, we will leave it there. Thanks again for coming, everybody, and I hope you have a great night.